Welcome to Scary Bedtime Stories. In this episode, we have two stories that take place centuries ago, one in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the other in Japan. In the 1800s, as a young woman, Lily went to work in a clothing factory as a seamstress. Today, we would probably call that factory a sweatshop. Lily was good at her job and was promoted to supervisor. At this time, electric lights were just coming into use, and that meant Lily would often have to stay late at the factory to organize work for the next day. Typically, all the young women working at the factory lived in boarding houses a few blocks down the road from the street from the factory along what was called River Road. This was the industrial warehouse and shipping district of Cincinnati on the banks of the Ohio River. The young women would walk together at the end of each day to get to the boarding houses. A boardwalk ran along the edge of River Road, a street that was often muddy but still the business center of the district. For safety, the women traveled in groups past all the hustle and bustle of the taverns and shops. Lily had to walk those few blocks to her boarding house alone when her work required her to stay late at the factory. She found the boardwalk too noisy, crowded, and dangerous to walk comfortably, and the horse and wagon traffic of the street no less hazardous. Eventually, she decided that the safest place to walk was the outer edge of the boardwalk next to the street. One night, as Lily walked home, she passed a loud and boisterous brawl in front of one of the taverns. Lily stepped into the street to avoid the fighting, but there she had to dodge the traffic. When Lily finally arrived at the steps of her boarding house, her roommate Sandy came bounding down the steps to greet her with a series of questions. "Oh, Lily, who is that handsome man I saw escorting you through the crowd?" Sandy asked. "Is he your new beau?" "What do you mean?" Lily snapped back. "I was not with any man." "Okay, Lily, you don't have to tell me. You can just keep your little secret," Sandy teased. "That's not funny." Lily brushed past Sandy. Sandy kept quiet. A few weeks later, Lily was again making her way home in the evening through the crowds along River Road. Again, she had to pass a loud and angry brawl involving two men, one of whom had been forced into the street by the other who was brandishing a knife. Lily stopped. The man withdrew his knife, and the crowd let her pass by. When Lily opened the door to the boarding house, Sandy was standing just inside. "Oh, Lily, I saw it all from our window. Your beau is so brave. I saw him pull out his gun and make that man with the knife back away." "Sandy, this is no time to be teasing me. I don't know why the man with the knife backed away, but there was no man with a gun. There is no beau." Lily was obviously upset. "But Lily," Sandy insisted, "I saw him." "That's enough, Sandy. No more." Lily went to their room. Sandy followed silently and resolved not to bring the subject up again. A few days later, on a Sunday afternoon, Lily and Sandy were cleaning up around the boarding house and had carried out some trash and papers to the backyard to burn. Suddenly, Sandy reached down into the burn pile and pulled out a smoldering newspaper. Hastily, she put out the flames. "It's him! It's him!" Sandy shouted. "It's your beau, Lily!" "What on earth are you talking about?" Lily grabbed the paper and Sandy leaned over her shoulder, pointing. "See the picture? It's him!" That page of the newspaper featured an artist's hand-drawn rendering of what might have been a tintype photograph of a young man in a uniform. His name was Charles McElvey, but to the women's surprise, they discovered they were reading an obituary in a newspaper that was several months old. "I don't understand, Lily. That's the man I saw escorting you through the crowd a few days ago," Sandy declared. The women looked at each other blankly for a moment and then went back to reading the yellowed, charred newspaper. Charles McElvey had been a guard at one of the factories on River Road and had been killed while attempting to rescue some women from a fracas outside one of the taverns. Lily and Sandy could not believe what they were reading. There was an address given in the article, and Lily swore they would get to the bottom of this mystery. The next Sunday afternoon, Lily and Sandy took a streetcar to a distant part of Cincinnati, a neighborhood they had never visited before. They found the address to be occupied by a little house on the tree-lined street. A tiny elderly lady answered their knock on the door and invited them to sit in the parlor while she made some tea. "I suppose you're here about my Charles," she said. Lily and Sandy looked at each other and back toward the woman. "Yes," Sandy said with some hesitation. "I know," the old lady said quietly. "You two are not the first, and I suppose you will not be the last. So many have told me that after my son was killed, they have seen him helping young women down the street through that awful district. You know, they've been calling him the Angel of River Road." She went on to explain that Charles was always so distressed that he could not do anything to make that street safer, but he couldn't leave his post. That one night he did try to help, and that was the night he was killed, she finished. Lily and Sandy stayed and chatted a while with Mrs. McElvey. They thanked her for telling them about Charles and for her hospitality. Lily walked with confidence down River Road from then on. There were still nights when she had to make her way through the foreboding chaos of the boardwalk and the street. But when she reached the steps of her boarding house, she could always pause and look back a couple of blocks just in time to see a man in uniform waving to her. In ancient Japan lived a poor farmer and his wife. They had many children. The youngest son's name was Sesshu. Every day Sesshu and his family went to work in the rice paddies. Although he was small and weak, little Sesshu worked beside his parents, brothers, and sisters. But, as often as not, you could see him drawing in the dirt, for that is what he liked to do most of all. Sesshu drew the snow-capped mountains, he drew the flowers, birds, and trees. He drew his family working in the rice paddies. But what he liked to draw most of all were cats. Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. When times were good, Sesshu's parents bought him fine white rice paper. Once, when the rice harvest was especially bountiful, they bought him a bamboo brush with fine horsehair bristles and a round stone hollowed out in the middle and a stick of shiny black ink. He ground the ink stick into the ink stone and mixed it with a little water. Dipping the brush into the ink, he drew his beloved cats. One year, however, there was a terrible famine upon the land. It was said a huge rat goblin held a spell over all of Japan. In winter, it opened its greedy mouth and swallowed snowflakes. When the rains came, it lapped up the drops of water. When the rice began to grow, the terrible rat gnawed on the tender seedlings, and the rice stalks withered and died. The harvest was poor, and people went to bed hungry. With very little food to feed their family, Sesshu's parents worried that their young son would not live through the winter. So they decided to take him to the next village where there was a temple. Perhaps the priests would take him in, take care of him, and teach him to be a priest. They wrapped Sesshu's few belongings in a blanket and set out for the temple, and when they arrived, Sesshu's father knocked on the door. As the paper screen door slid aside, an old priest greeted them. Sesshu's parents bowed to him. "There is a famine in the land, and we are poor farmers and cannot afford to feed our family. Our youngest son is small and frail. We are afraid he will not live through the winter. Please take him in and teach him to be a priest. He is a good boy and will do whatever you ask." The old priest asked Sesshu a few questions. When the boy answered his questions quickly and accurately, the priest saw that Sesshu was a bright child and agreed to take him in. Sesshu bowed to his parents and bid them farewell. He followed the priest to a small room where he unrolled his blanket and put away his few belongings. Underneath the blanket, he hid his prized possessions, his bamboo brush, ink stick, and mixing stone. Then he followed the old priest into the temple. "You will have to work hard, Sesshu," said the old priest. "You must keep the temple floors clean and work in the rice paddies. And when the priests pray at night, you must pray with us." Sesshu promised to work hard, and indeed he did. He worked so hard at his tasks that he went to bed exhausted. Each and every night, for many weeks, he did not think once about drawing. So it was a surprise to Seshu when, early one morning while the priests were sleeping, he woke up with an uncontrollable urge to draw. He took out his ink stick and chipped some ink into the mixing stone. Then he took a little water, mixed it together with the bamboo brush, and began to draw. All over the temple floors. What did he draw? Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. When the priests came into the temple and saw the cats, they said, "Who did this? This should not be." But Seshu said nothing. Weeks passed and Seshu worked hard, keeping the temple floors clean, working in the rice paddies, and going to prayers. But again he woke up very early one morning and had a terrible urge to draw. He took out his ink stick, his mixing stone, and his bamboo brush. He added water to the ink, mixed it together, and began to draw all over the temple walls. And what did he draw? Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. Once again, when the priests came into the temple and looked upon the walls, they said, "Who did this? This must not be." But again Seshu said nothing. Many more weeks passed before Seshu woke again with that urge to draw. He took out his ink stick, mixing stone, and brush. This time, when the priests awoke, they did not notice anything unusual. Seshu swept the temple floors and worked in the rice paddies. That night, when the priests opened their books to pray, what did they see? Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. The old priest looked at Seshu and said, "Is it you who have drawn on our floors, walls, and prayer books?" Seshu hung his head and said, "Yes, it was I." "Seshu, it is obvious you were meant to be an artist, not a priest. You must leave, but before you go, I will give you some advice. Avoid large places at night. Stay to small spaces." Seshu thanked the old priest. Then, taking his belongings and blanket, he left the temple. The rat goblin still held Japan in its spell. There would not be enough food in his parents' village, so Seshu walked to the nearest village in the opposite direction. Perhaps there's a temple. If I work hard and do not draw, maybe they will let me stay. He walked until he came to the next village. Like Seshu's village, the people were also affected by the drought. Here too, the rat goblin's spell kept the rains from falling and the rice from growing. Seshu stopped everyone he met. "Can you tell me where I might find the temple?" The people's faces were pinched with worry and hunger. They scurried away and did not answer. Finally, he asked a gnarled old woman, "Please tell me where I might find the temple." She pointed to a steep hill just outside the village. Seshu bowed, thanked the old woman, and started to turn away, but she touched his arm and warned, "Avoid large places at night. Stay to small spaces." It took the entire day, but he finally reached the top of the hill. The temple grounds were littered with leaves and dirt. Seshu thought to himself, "I will sweep the grounds clean." As he knocked on the old door frame, he noticed the wood was cracked and the paper door was torn. "I will fix the door. I will work very hard and maybe they will let me stay." When no one answered, he carefully slid the door aside and walked into the temple. It seemed to be deserted. Seshu was very tired after his long walk, so he rolled out his blanket and lay down. As he closed his eyes, he noticed several large pure white rice paper screens on the far wall. Seshu sat up. They were beautiful. Seeing the screens, Seshu again had an uncontrollable urge to draw. He took out his ink stick and chipped some ink into the mixing stone. Then he took a little water from the courtyard, mixed it together with the bamboo brush, and began to draw. What did he draw? Cats, 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 cats eating, sleeping, jumping, leaping, cats, 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 cats fighting, biting, howling, yowling, cats, cats, cats. Never had Seshu drawn such beautiful cats. They were almost perfect. Lying down again, he closed his eyes. Then he remembered the words of the old priest and the old woman. Avoid large places at night. Stay to small spaces. Though the temple was itself large, on one side of the room, he found a small cupboard just big enough for a small boy and a blanket. Seshu squeezed himself in and fell asleep. Around midnight, Seshu woke to a loud scratching and sniffing. He was so frightened that he could scarcely breathe. The scratching and sniffing came closer and closer. It stopped right at the cupboard door. Then, to his astonishment, one long black claw pierced the cupboard wall. Seshu heard a tremendous growling and hissing, followed by a horrible screeching and screaming, thrashing and dashing. The boy covered his ears, but he could still hear tearing and ripping, roaring and bumping. All night long, the terrible sounds continued. Just before dawn, it grew deathly quiet. Seshu waited until the first rays of sunlight filtered through the cupboard door. Then, very cautiously, he opened the door and peeked outside. In the middle of the floor lay an enormous rat. It was as big as a cow. Its bones were broken and its flesh was torn apart. There was blood all over the floor, and the rat lay still, as silent as death. "Who saved me? Who killed the rat goblin?" Seshu looked around. There, on the rice paper screens, from the mouths of each of the cats he had drawn the night before, dripped blood and rat's flesh. During the night, the cats had come alive and saved Seshu's life. Seshu bowed to the cats, then rolled up his blanket and left the temple. Outside, a light rain was falling. Now that the rat goblin was dead and the spell broken, rice would grow again. Seshu walked toward his own village. When he arrived, his family was overjoyed to see him. They say that Seshu lived a long and happy life in the village. He did indeed become a famous artist. To this very day, people in Japan admire his paintings. Seshu drew the snow-capped mountains. He drew the flowers, birds, and trees. He drew the people working in the rice paddies, but every day, no matter what, he was always sure to draw at least 1 or 2 cats.